I'm Dave Cooper, and I'm a priest of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, and I have the great pleasure of introducing a fellow priest from the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, someone who grew up in the most segregated city in the nation. Brian was ordained a priest 1983, went on for graduate studies, worked in parishes, became a professor at St. Francis Seminary, then became vice president of the seminary, then took a position at Marquette University in Milwaukee, and then in your booklet you will see all the wonderful things that he did after that. Currently, he is a professor at Fordham University, which I am most impressed about Brian is the fact that our mission statement says one of our goals is to be a prophetic voice in action. And Brian certainly embodies every bit of that. He said in an interview recently, "The deepest reason why I have chosen to be a Catholic ethicist who focuses on racial issues stems from my understanding of racism. Although it can be seen as a political issue, sociological phenomenon, or cultural divide." He went back to Dr. Martin Luther King's view and has discovered racism as a soul sickness that resonates most deeply with him. So, without further ado, I would like to give you Father Brian Massengale.
Good evening. And thank you, Dave. It's good to be with brothers and with supportive brothers. And sisters too. Hey, wait, let's clear something up right now. I'm not dissing the sisters, but as you'll hear more on Wednesday, it has not been my experience that priests, brother priests, have always acted like brothers. Well, yes. And so it's good to be among a group of priests and whose heart I instinctively believe that I resonate with. I've been wanting to be a part of this group for some time, and you've approached me for some time, but my schedule's not allowed myself to be here. And so first of all, I want to thank Aidan McEleenan for always saying, "When are you going to come? When are you going to come?" And it's like, okay, here I am, Aidan, okay, finally. I also want to thank my fellow Milwaukee priests that are here. Dave Cooper, Jean Posernich, I saw Jerry Huchiak somewhere floating around, Bob Glauderman. I always tell people, even though I work in New York now, that one of the things I'm most proud of is being a Milwaukee priest. And being a Milwaukee priest was ordained by Rembert Weekland. That Rembert Weekland was someone who, yes. That Rembert Weekland was a person who, yes, had some mistakes. Oh God, who doesn't have mistakes? But he was someone who is instrumental in recognizing the potential I had as a priest, and who really supported that vision and supported my leadership in the church. So I'm very, very grateful, and always will be grateful, and consider myself to be a part of the presbytery of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. I wear that identity with great pride. To redeem the soul of America, Martin Luther King's vision and its challenge to American Catholics. In the book of Proverbs, we read that without a vision, the people perish. Or as the Protestants have in their translation, the New International Version, without a prophetic vision, the people of God cast off all restraint. The inspiration for my presentation tonight comes from a question that was posed to me on a panel that was convened to consider the challenges of diversity in light of our recent election. And near the end of that hour-long discussion, the moderator of the panel asked me, well, Father, given your analysis of the depth of racism in this country, what would a racially just society look like? It's a very simple, straightforward question, but one that stumped me. I managed to articulate a response, yet I can now admit to you that it sounded more convincing than I really felt. Because the question haunted me. Truth be told, I did not know. It was easier to describe and either to diagnose the evils that afflict us. It's more challenging to state the motivating, animating vision that compels and inspires the difficult work for justice. The truth is, I did not know and do not know what a racially just society would look like, or a just society at all, since it's something that I have never experienced, and in fact, no one in this room has ever experienced. As the African-American historian Robin Kelley notes, he said, trying to envision somewhere in advance of nowhere is an extremely difficult task. And yet this question, what would a just society look like, continues to haunt. For as Robin Kelley continues to note, without what he calls freedom dreams, we don't know what to build, but only what to knock down. We know what we're fighting against, but what are we fighting for? He continues this challenging line of thought by saying, we not only end up confused and rudderless and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers or tactics, but it's a process that can and must transform us. As your leader talked about with Pope Francis, summoning us to a revolution is not about being clever, knowing what to do and what to say. It should be something that does something to us. So what would a just society look like? What is the mission of social justice activists and people of goodwill in the face of the social evils and the fractures that continue to haunt us, especially at this very difficult time in our country? To address those questions, I want to retrieve the insights of Martin Luther King Jr. We're meeting in Atlanta. We'll be going to the King Center tomorrow, or Wednesday rather. The mission of this signature organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was to redeem the soul of America. And that mission grounded his struggle against the interlocking evils of racial injustice and economic exploitation and militarism. And I think that his thoughts have a valuable orientation for us as we address the need for visions to guide us and inspire our work of healing a fractured society. So to that end, let you know there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this is your slide here. The yawning person right there, because after all, you've traveled a distance from some of you today, and you've just eaten dinner, and as it says somewhere, I remember hearing, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So in case your flesh nods off, what I'm going to first do is talk about what did a king mean by redeeming the soul of the nation. Then I'm going to talk about the soul of America, and I'm going to use two lenses to try to get to the soul of America, looking at the Black Lives Matter movement and what did the election of 2016 reveal about our soul. So you want to stay awake for that part. Then I'm going to talk about what a king's vision of doing soul work. And I talked about a vision of enunciating the vision of the great world house that requires us to become citizens of the world. And then I'm going to conclude with a few words upon what is the challenge of this vision for U.S. Catholicism. And where is the hope that can ground us in healing the fractures that so mark our nation? So there's the beginning, the middle, and the end. If you doze off in the middle and you can wake up, you'll know exactly where we are. You should also know that, as Dave told you, I'm a priest of the Archdiocese, ordained in 1983. I'm also the first African American to be ordained for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. And most of my family are Assemblies of God Pentecostals. My immediate family are the only Catholics in the extended family. So every once in a while, I may depart from the outline. Every once in a while, we may just have a Pentecostal moment. And don't worry, we'll just go with the flow and go with the Spirit and do what the Spirit say do. But then for the Catholics, we'll get back on the topic and we'll follow the red letters that are up here, okay? All right. Something for everybody here. I don't want to make you get too uncomfortable yet. The soul of a nation. To redeem the soul of a nation. When we tell King's story and the history of the civil rights movement in general, we too often describe them as a quest to overturn segregation laws and the visible practices of racial humiliation that stained the southern states. And that's exactly how we tell the story. The story of African Americans in the United States in 10 seconds. Black people were here as slaves. It was bad. Lincoln came and freed the slaves. Things were still bad in the South. Martin Luther King came and changed those laws. Barack Obama was elected, and now we're in the racial promised land, and that's black history in 10 seconds. And that's how we tell the story. It's a very comfortable story, with obvious good guys and bad guys, and it's a story where the good guys won. We tell it as a classic feel-good story. And the moral of the story is that our nation is one where justice eventually and always triumphs. And because the struggle was triumphant, because we dealt with America's wounds, because we did all that back then, those who maintain otherwise are the real culprits and the sowers of racial division. Or as someone keeps telling me, why do you have to keep bringing all that stuff up? Such a truncated story seriously misrepresents what King and the movement were about. One of King's associates, C.T. Vivian, recalled that King wrote the words to redeem the soul of America on the window of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference's headquarters. King, he said, viewed the mission of the SCLC as the transformation of society, not simply social change. Now, the exact origins of this phrase, to reveal the soul of America, are difficult to trace. Some attribute it to the social gospel movement, others to A. Philip Randolph, the African-American activist. But regardless of its origins and its inspiration, the thrust of the phrase is clear. From the beginning, King saw that the civil rights movement was engaged in something far deeper than promoting legislative changes or challenging social practices, as important as these were. Because his insight was that such laws and practices were simply the external signs of a far deeper reality or malady that needed to be addressed for genuine social transformation. This is something that we as Catholics could be kind of familiar with. Society, the visible social institutions, laws, customs, and policies are reflective of something deeper and unseen. Sounds like a sacrament, right? Right. These are sacraments, but the underlying reality is what King was deeply rooted in. Because if you don't deal with this, and you only change this, the deeper set of meanings, will find another way of becoming visibly expressed. That's why King said we have to redeem the soul of America. The pivotal insight behind redeeming the soul of America or saving the soul of America was the realization that the external, obvious, visible forms of injustice stemmed from something unseen, intangible, yet real. And failing to engage this unseen yet pervasive force meant that it would sooner or later mutate and express itself in other guises. King called this unseen force the soul of a nation. So what did King mean by soul? For King, soul meant the essence, the animating center of a person or group. That which inevitably affects a person's decisions and behaviors. King believed that, like individuals, nations were a spiritual and moral entity. A nation is not just a collection of isolated individuals. It's a collective entity with a distinctive identity, with distinctive values, with a soul. Thus, by the soul of a nation, King meant the set of meanings and values that informs a people's way of life, that affects its national decisions and behaviors, that provides a frame of reference for a group's identity. Soul is not simply a way of acting, it's a way of being. It's expressed in external signs and symbols, such as speech, dress, customs, laws, understandings of time, art, and literature, but soul is more than a sum total of a society's externals. For King believed it was possible for the externals to change, but without soul change, without a moral, ethical transformation, what in other places he calls a revolution of values, the underlying soul would simply find new expression in new laws and social customs. Let me make that kind of plain. And I studied for 3 years in Rome. I got my degree from the Alfonsianum, the Redemptorist place for moral theology. And even though I lived for 3 years in Rome, and even though I mastered Italian etiquette, even though I learned how to, push my way onto the bus to get to the Vatican, and even though I knew how to do all of that, no one ever mistook me for an Italian. And not just for the obvious reason, because mastering the externals of a society or a culture doesn't make you a member. Even though I could become relatively fluent in Italian, even though I could master restaurant etiquette, even though I learned how to curse out Italian cab drivers, because you learn all the bad words in a language first, those are the ones you need to survive. There's something about the Italians that will always elude me. I didn't possess their soul, their way of being. This is what King was talking about. We need to get to the soul of a nation. King wrestled with the soul of America, and he realized that the true solution to our problems requires a transformation in values. And that's true, but I would add more. It requires that we first articulate what are our animating values, those core beliefs that inform and sustain the social practices that lead to unjust social living, that lead to the fractures among us. The true solution to America's fractures and divisions require that we go underneath the visible, that we get behind the obvious, that we articulate the soul of this nation. What is or what are the unseen yet pervasive forces that drive our fractures and poison our common life? What is our soul? Describing soul is always a difficult and elusive endeavor because of its very nature. Soul is intangible and exceeds rational articulation. So I'm going to take a stab at articulating these core beliefs in order to stimulate your conversation and reflection. And I will do so first through a reflection on the Black Lives Matter movement, a movement that has engendered what some have called a new civil rights movement in our country. And then I'm going to also take a stab at this, the reflection upon what Donald Trump reveals about us. You're not falling asleep yet? I didn't think so. Okay, good. The Black Lives Matter movement, we've heard the phrase, maybe some of us have seen the platform, but we forget that behind this movement are very real lives, deaths, and tragedies. So let's put some faces around the phrase Black Lives Matter. Trayvon Martin, killed in February of 2012 in Sanford, Florida at the age of 17 while simply trying to walk home in the rain until he was accosted by what he called a creepy adult. Dontre Hamilton, a story that is familiar to most of us in Milwaukee, of a young man who was sleeping in a park, not breaking any laws. One police officer came upon him and saw nothing was going on here. A second officer came, poked him with his nightstick. The guy who was a paranoid schizophrenic woke up, thought he was under attack, started swinging at the officer, and the officer unloaded his revolver and shot him 15 times. Eric Gardner died in Staten Island while in a police hold which was not sanctioned by any police regulation. His last words, "I can't breathe," became a motto, a mantra that was used by those who would rally to bring public attention to this terrible epidemic of Black lives being lost. John Crawford III, a young father, simply shopping in Walmart, buying a toy gun for his son. Someone saw him walking around the store with this toy gun, called the police came, saw him with this gun, and shot him while simply shopping for a toy for his son. Michael Brown, Jr. Most of us are familiar with the story, but what goes often unreported was not simply the fact that he was killed and now the circumstances of his death are even more in dispute, but the fact that his body was left baking out in a hot August street for 4 hours while his family were left to look on helplessly. And when they started to grieve too loudly, they were threatened with arrest. Freddie Gray Jr. died of what they called a high-energy impact sustained during transport in a police van that severed his spinal cord. It was a practice that was so familiar in the department that they called it rough rides. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, did an investigation of the Baltimore Police Department and found that there was what they called a pattern and practice of unconstitutional policing in the Baltimore Police Department. Pattern and practice is legalese for saying that these practices were more typical than isolated, more common than unusual. The Charleston Nine, where a young man, Dylan Roof, after praying with these people during a Bible study in an African American Methodist Episcopal church, opened fire, but then told those he allowed to survive the reason for their killing. You have to go. You rape our women, you're taking over our country, so you have to go. Sandra Bland died in Hempstead, Texas, arrested for pulling over for failing to signal a lane change, something that I'm sure is not unusual to her, but died of asphyxiation under causes that are still murky and unsettled. Alton Sterling, shot multiple times at close range by 2 cops. Witnesses say he was not at all involved in the crime for which he was suspected, nor did he draw or make any threatening move with the officers with the gun that he was carrying. It's interesting that we talk about the fact that, well, why was he carrying a gun? In many cases, these are guns that are legally carried, but some can legally carry them and others cannot. And Philando Castile, whose death was captured on videotape and posted on Facebook by his girlfriend, young daughter in the back seat. Again, during a routine traffic stop, had an unloaded gun for which he had a permit. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. May they rest in peace. But of all of the deaths, and there have been so very, very many, this is the one. This is the one that woke me from my sleep. And I was crying. And that doesn't happen to me very often. A young boy sitting on a swing, doing what children do, playing with a toy. And because some neighbor got upset, he was dead within 2 seconds of the officer's arrival. But what was even more disturbing was that I happened to be traveling through LaGuardia Airport, and people are watching CNN as the breaking news came up. There was some court case was going on, and some relatives of Tamir's were being emotional in their grief and in their anger at the failure of an indictment. And I watched the faces of those watching the airport monitor, and they were cold and stony and angry. They could not empathize with a parent's grief. They could not empathize or mourn over a life taken far too soon. And that's when I wrote the words that Dave introduced me with. I wrote in my journal, something catastrophic is happening in our country. And I don't mean only the morbid, wrenching, almost incessant killings of black young men and boys, for these deaths reveal a deep malady at the core of America, a coldness, a callousness, a soul-warping disease. For racism is a soul sickness. There are many ways to understand racism, a political issue, as a sociological phenomenon, it's a cultural divide. But for me, at its deepest level, racism is a soul sickness. It is a profound warping of the human spirit, one that enables human beings to create communities of cold, callous indifference to their darker brothers and sisters. Stripped to its core, racism is that disturbing interior disease that enables people to not care for those who don't look like them. To quote a fellow scholar, the real meaning of race comes down largely to this: is this someone I should care about? I went on. Racism has become a spiritual cataract that limits our vision, determines whom we do and do not notice, who is beyond the reach of our concern or interest. It's revealed today not so much in verbal taunts and slurs, not only in the continuing inadequate representation in positions of power or overrepresentation in our prisons. Racism today is revealed in a lack of empathy and a profound indifference. The pervasive lack of concern, the social callousness of the majority of society to the horrors and scandals that are unfolding in our midst. America has become like the rich man in the biblical parable of Lazarus, blind to and uncaring about the plight of its citizens of a darker hue. A soul sickness, a warping of the spirit, a deep ambivalence on the part of white people collectively about black people collectively. Let me say it again, about white people collectively, about black people collectively. Because what often happens when I talk like this, some people are getting very nervous and upset, and that's okay. You're allowed to get nervous and upset and a little anxious, because when we're talking about race, we're talking about some really deep stuff. It's not about who you are as an individual, it's about who we are collectively. And because that ambivalence is so often unaddressed, that's why we find ourselves repeatedly asking the question, why, after so many marches and protests and even changed laws, do we find ourselves in the same place over and over and over again? Because we've changed the externals, but we haven't gone underneath and interrogated the soul, the warping of soul that will manifest itself in new forms. As Martin Luther King described this ambivalence in classic words that I wish I had said, but he was a greater man than me. He said, Negro and white have a fundamentally different definition of equality. For whites, equality is a loose expression for improvement. After all, well, it's 2017. I mean, things are better now, aren't they? But as Malcolm X once said, if you put the knife in 12 inches and pull it out 6, that's not progress. White America is not even psychologically prepared to close the gap. Essentially, it seeks only to make it less painful and less obvious, but in most cases to retain it. And then he concluded, the great majority of Americans are suspended between two opposing attitudes. They are uneasy with injustice, but unwilling yet to pay a significant price to eradicate it. That ambivalence, King argued, is at the core of America's soul. And until we interrogate and raise up that soul, we will continue to have the fractures that plague our life. Or as I put it in more prosaic words, we're going to continue circling back on this issue of Black Lives Matter until we confront it at its deepest level and say that there's a soul sickness present in our nation And until we have the willingness to address it, and not just address it rationally, but to address it using the best resources of our symbol and ritual, we will not really be able to deal with or get ourselves out of this destructive feedback loop that we find ourselves caught up in. The soul of a nation. Let's try to get at this another way. Let's look at the election of the president and what it reveals about our soul. Now, before you get all nervous again, let me make sure you're nervous for the right reasons. I am not relitigating the election. The result is clear. He is the president. Second, I am not criticizing anyone's vote. People voted as they did or didn't vote at all for a variety of reasons. And finally, I'm not here to judge the president's character, for I am not his confessor and do not have access to his heart. But I'm rephrasing the question very specifically. The ministerial challenge we face is not Donald Trump himself. That makes it too easy if it's all about him. I'm more interested in what his election reveals about us, about who we are as a nation. For the challenges that faces you and I as ministers of the gospel is what his election reveals about us collectively, about who we are as a nation, and the response we are to give our people in the light of our faith. Like it or not, you have to give the president credit for this. He has found a way at tapping into deep American fears, especially our fear of the stranger. That not politically correct part of us that wants everyone to think like us, act like us, pray like us, dress like us, talk like us, and look like us. That unpolitically correct part of ourselves that deep down resents the fact that they are not like us. His denigration of the immigrant, the Mexican judge, the bad hombres, the inner cities as hotbeds of violence, this is what many have found and still find attractive. He talks the way I do. He says out loud what I'm thinking. He says in public what I say at home. He puts in words what I feel. Many of us have relatives who probably talk like that. Trump is the face of our collective and deep-rooted fears, resentments, and anxieties around the stranger. That was at the core of his embrace of birtherism, that somehow Obama was not like us. There's another way to get at this, and that is to say that Trump is America's shadow. He epitomizes our reality TV culture, a cultural form where truth doesn't matter and what is said doesn't matter. In the world of reality TV, truth is not what is objectively the case. What is said or done is real as long as you say it loudly, confidently, and with enough snark and attitude. Ask Snooki, okay? That's the Jersey Shore reality TV show, in case you forgot. Trump is our shadow. He reflects our fetishizing of entertainment as news and spectacle as reality. Recall what the president of CNN said. Yes, when we covered his rallies wall to wall, it's bad for the country, but it's good for ratings. He personifies our prizing of flair and style over content and substance. After all, someone said, well, you know, Hillary's just not that exciting. She's not that charismatic. He personifies our collective anti-intellectualism and our impatience with difficult thinking. Our denigration of expertise and our confusion of punditry with knowledge and wisdom. He personifies our practice of short-term thinking and our addiction to immediate gratification, our obsession with celebrity and the trappings of success, which has the mirror side of indifference to the poor and evasion of genuine insight, through a nostalgic return to an America that never was and never really existed. Make America great again, which begs the questions, for whom was America ever great? For whom did America work? Trump is America, but not the America of which we are proud. He represents the triumph of the ugly American, the adolescent American, the America that believes that it is entitled and special in a way that no other nation or people are. Trump is us. The us we seldom look at, admit, or accept. Because I'm sure there are some of you out there saying, well, he ain't me. But he does reflect that unacknowledged shadow us. That us we don't admit except to say it's a blip, as if slavery, genocide, torture, Abu Ghraib did not and do not reveal something essential of who we are as a nation. Trump, in a word, is the face of our unresolved racism and our frat boy misogyny. Trump is not the problem. Removing him, as important or as necessary as that may be, is not the answer. For Trump reveals our national soul. He is but the external manifestation of a deeper malady, the fundamental distortion of our core ideals. He manifests the spiritual dis-ease that underlies our fractures and divisions. Removing him is not the answer, because King would remind us that absent serious attention to the soul of America, sooner or later another manifestation will arise. Just as Trump is another manifestation of trends that were expressed long before him, such as the 1990s contract with America, or Reagan's famous quote that ketchup counts as a vegetable, or the bluster that was reflected in the first President Bush's statement that we're going to, quote, kick Saddam's ass, and his second son's vow to fulfill that promise by conquering with shock and awe. America's soul. Ready to slit your wrist yet? We can't. We can't. Because brothers and sisters, but as ministers of the gospel, we don't have the luxury of giving in to despair. Our people need us. They need a prophetic word from us now more than ever before. We have to take a deep look. As physicians of the soul, that's what we call ourselves after all. We'll get to that in a moment at the end. We have to have the courage to look deeply at what is really going on underneath the fractures so that we can speak a word that is healing, that we can provide a balm in Gilead. So in light of that, what vision can we offer? King offered a vision that he said was a counter vision to the malady he saw in America's soul. It was the vision of a great world house. We live in a fractured society. We need a vision that can guide and sustain the soul work that the present moment demands. We need a compelling vision that can sustain us through the social, political, economic, and even ecclesial struggles and conflicts that are going to happen if we take soul work seriously. So what are we fighting for? King called the vision the Great World House. He described it this way: We have inherited a large house, a great world house, in which we have to live together, black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu, a family unduly separated in ideas, cultures, and interests, who, because we can never live again apart, must somehow learn to live with each other in peace. King meant these oppositions of people coming together, but not in an exhaustive sense, because his widow, Coretta Scott King, continued her husband's legacy and extended this great world house to also include struggles for sexual and gender equality. And she specifically mentioned that the plight of gays and lesbians as also being integral to the realization of this vision of this great world house. And as we've celebrated just yesterday, the first anniversary of the worst mass shooting in American history that took place in a gay nightclub in Orlando, we realize that integral justice for all means all. No exceptions, no exclusions, no small print. God either loves all of us or none of us have a claim on God's mercy. The Great World House was King's vision of an inclusive human community where all are accepted, whatever their differences. A human community where social differences are not a cause for fear or an occasion for grudging toleration, but rather a source of celebration. The Great World House entailed embracing a new identity, becoming a citizen of the world, a citizen of the world whose loyalties transcended tribe and race and nation and religion. The expansiveness of King's vision is realized in his conviction that the greatest dangers to the realization of this great world house were what he called the giant triplets of evil: racial injustice, economic exploitation or poverty, and war or militarism. And at the core of all of these, King said, was greed, or the profit motive. But King's insight was that these evils were so interconnected that to have an effective struggle against any one of them entailed engaging with them all. That you cannot effectively work for racial justice without tackling poverty. You can't tackle poverty without tackling militarism. And if you're going to tackle militarism, you have to attack the others as well. Let's see the relevance of King's insight for today. Talking about healing a fractured society, so sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. So let's look at how the Census Bureau pictures the fractures among us. When you see our maps here, St. Louis, the areas in dark blue are areas that are 85% or more white. The dark red, 85% or more African American. The lighter pink, 50 to 85% African American. Note the heavy concentration and isolation of the population. But St. Louis is not alone. Chicago, Cleveland, Buffalo. I put Buffalo up there for a reason because it's got the area of purple. It's one place up there, and that's 85% or more American Indian. Philadelphia. And Milwaukee, the most intensely racially segregated city in America, but not alone, as we've seen. that heavy area concentration. This area concentration is 85% or more Hispanic. Once you leave northern Milwaukee County, the chances of encountering another African American are statistically insignificant. So we are racially divided. But King would remind us that racial injustice and economic exploitation and poverty go hand in hand. One of the measures of poverty are those residents who are without access to a vehicle. As we saw during Katrina, many people were trapped in the city and could not evacuate because they had no means of escaping the city because they did not have access to a car. And in Milwaukee, when you see the areas of green, the darkest green are areas in which the majority of the people, residents, do not have access, do not own a vehicle. And when you look at the overlap, you see there's almost an exact overlap between the darkest areas of the city and the poorest areas of the city. So is it racism or poverty if you look at Milwaukee's divisions? And Milwaukee is simply a case study for what's going on around the country. It's poverty because the people who need jobs can't access them. But it's exacerbated by racism. Because the reason they can't access them is because of race-based fears and oppositions of whites who won't tolerate regional public transit. Economic disadvantage is one of the principal effects and reasons of racism. Racism and poverty are not the same, but an effective struggle against any one requires engaging the other one as well. And King's vision also then tells us that you can't look at that in isolation from defense spending, because the military budget consumes the vast majority of our federal resources by far. By far. This is where the political discussion takes place. This goes largely unarticulated. But it's not because we're fighting wars in Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan. Those are funded outside of the defense budget. So the true source of proportional military spending is even far more. Where does that money go to? It goes to weapons production. Even weapons that the Pentagon says it doesn't need. Sometimes a picture, again, speaks 1,000 words. The military budget versus what we spend for jobs and human development. And then we hear, isn't there some kind of law against panhandling? King summed it up well. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Note again, spirit, soul. The triplets of evil, united by the profit motive of greed. This is the malady that afflicts us. And King offers an alternative vision, the vision of a great world house. Vision. Visions are important. To redeem the soul of America, we have to adapt a new vision, a new center that animates our decisions. Visions illuminate possibilities that are not taken, paths not yet examined. Visions, metaphors, dreams. These are not naive ideals. They're part of soul. And we are in a struggle for the soul of our country. As I conclude, I want to say a few words. What does this mean for American Catholics? And let me be bold and let me be blunt and let me say this. We cannot redeem the soul of America if we are not going to be willing to redeem the soul of U.S. Catholicism. We are not immune. The soul of American organized religion is what we need to redeem, including American Catholicism. We cannot escape the fact that white American Christians, including the majority of white Catholics and an overwhelming portion of white evangelicals, supported the candidacy of Trump, regardless of his denigration of immigrants and expressing of what Paul Ryan himself called, quote, textbook racism, unquote. We cannot escape the fact that in the face of all that Trump represented, our bishops, with few exceptions, kept a jarring silence or even expressed tacit support. Why? There are many reasons. But I want to suggest that Catholics were found wanting because our political, social, and spiritual imaginations have become atrophied and dried up. We talk more about religious liberty than we do about Jesus Christ. We talk more about fortnights for freedom than about the reign of God. Our discourse reflects a longing for nostalgia, for the preservation and restoration of the unquestioned privileges of a bygone age, before the humiliation of the self-inflicted wounds of clerical sexual abuse and episcopal cover-up. Catechesis is in a mess in this country. We need to talk less about the catechism of the Catholic Church and the Code of Canon Law, as if the Christian life consisted primarily of parroting precise doctrinal formulations and obeying canonical prohibitions. If we're going to redeem the soul of America, then we need to remember that the goal of the Christian life is not memorizing catechetical formulas, it's making disciples. It's making joyful witnesses of passionate charity. And those words aren't mine, they're Pope Benedict's. Now, notice I put Pope Benedict in red there, because Pope Francis is our hero here, okay? I saw everyone was posing with his little cutout and things like that. That's wonderful. But I've heard a rumor that there are some bishops who are not really that enamored with Pope Francis. Heard a rumor to that effect. So, let's go back to Pope Benedict then, who reminds us forcefully that though it's on the left side of the screen, yeah, your left, is not what it's about. We need to talk more about making saints and martyrs. Martyrs in the root sense of the Greek word meaning witnesses, who attract people not with the force of their minds or their charismatic personalities. We don't need Catholic Joel Osteens, God forbid. We don't need Catholic megachurches. We need witnesses who attract by the transparent radiance of their lives, not by crying out, "Look at me." We've got that already in the White House. Because in some sense, Trump has become America's megachurch pastor. Think about that. We need people who attract by their commitment to the radical Jesus, who embraced the stranger and the sexually dubious and the culturally marginalized, who sought out the lost and defended the outcast, who welcomed all around a pluralistic and multicultural and multicolored table. In short, we cannot redeem the soul of America if we do not reclaim the soul of Catholicism. And the soul of Catholicism is nothing less than love. Don't take my word for it, take Pope Benedict's. He writes, "In the end, love alone is worthy of faith and proves credible. The lives of the saints and martyrs demonstrate a singular beauty which fascinates and attracts because a Christian life lived in fullness speaks without words. We need men and women whose lives are eloquent and who know how to proclaim the gospel with clarity and courage, with transparency and action, and with the joyful passion of charity. Joyful witnesses of passionate charity. That's what we're called to create and sustain in our people. Rooted in that kind of love, a love so great that no cost or sacrifice will be enough to deter us from pursuing the goal of becoming a citizen of the world and building a great world house. We cannot redeem the soul of America if we're not also willing to reclaim the soul of Catholicism. Now back to more familiar territory. During his last pastoral visit to the United States, Pope Francis reminded us what's really in our soul. He addressed a joint session of Congress. It was an unprecedented event for a pope to address a joint session of Congress. And he taught us what makes America truly great. And he challenged us to the ongoing work of healing our nation's soul in these words. He said, "A nation can be considered great when it defends liberty as Lincoln did, when it fosters a culture which enables people to dream of full rights for all their brothers and sisters, as Martin Luther King sought to do, when it strives for justice and the cause of the oppressed, as Dorothy Day did by her tireless work, the fruit of a faith which becomes dialogue and sows peace in the contemplative style of Thomas Merton." In these remarks, I have sought to present some of the richness of your cultural heritage, of the spirit, the soul of the American people. It is my desire that this spirit, this soul, continue to develop and grow so that as many young people as possible can inherit and dwell in a land which has inspired so many people to dream. And the pontiff concluded his address by simply saying, "God bless America." May that blessing accompany us as we answer his call and King's call to redeem the soul of America and to reclaim the soul of U.S. Catholicism. And we do so in the hope that sustained King in the midst of what he called the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world. King reminded us that it would never be easy, that there would be difficult days ahead. But his greatest gift is a reminder that when we work for justice, when we work to heal the fractures among us, we do so not with our power, but with the power of God. This is perhaps his greatest gift to us, especially when we are weary and confused and can't see the way and feel that what we do is useless and nothing will make a difference. We take courage and hope from a sermon that he often preached, perhaps because he needed to remind himself, a sermon entitled, "God is Able." Our God is able, he says. Let this be our affirmation and be our ringing cry. It will give us courage to face the uncertainties of the future. When our days become weary with low-hovering clouds and our nights become darker than 1,000 midnights, let us remember there is a great benign power in the universe whose name is God. And he is able to make a way out of no way and transform dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows. This is our hope for becoming better men and women. This is our mandate for seeking to make a better world. I conclude this talk with the concluding words of my book on racial justice in the Catholic Church, In case you don't want to read the whole thing, this is the very end. Words of challenge and hope. Social life is made by human beings. The society we live in is the result of human choices and decisions. This means that human beings can change things. What humans break, divide, and separate, we can, with God's help, also heal, unite, and restore. What is now does not have to be. Therein lies the hope and the challenge. And now to God, whose power at working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine, to him be glory in the church, now and for all ages. Let the church say, amen. Amen.
Brian, I
Yep.
just briefly was
there you
about
are,
to
okay.
say, yeah, right in front of you.
This disembodied voice was coming. I didn't know
right.
it was God or not.
It's
so.
what Kevin was getting at. And to me, I think the challenge is, how do I, as a white person, attempt to speak and get other white people to begin to see this as an issue that we need to be concerned about it? As a black priest, do you have any insights into how do I mean? It's easy to just come out and say there's all kind of racism here. We're a bunch of white racists, and we got white privilege, but that turns people off. Is there another more nuanced way to get at it?
Wow, let's see. Where do I start? I can start there. I can start by saying I would not want to say that there's an advantage that I have that you don't have. In fact, I think it's just the opposite. Because when I talk about race, people are saying I'm playing the race card. So again, can't win. But when a white person says that there's a racial issue, it's heard in a different way. So we need to have racial allies like yourselves who are willing to say, no, there really is a race issue here. Brian's not making it up. He's not crazy. That's really important. Now, the other thing about white privilege is a very tricky thing, because the thing about white privilege, what makes it so insidious, is that you're not supposed to see it. What makes white privilege so insidious is the fact that you're supposed to accept it as being normal. This is just the way things are. And so when people say there's a white privilege thing going on here, your first reaction is going to be defensive. So let's take it out of the race thing and let's talk about it in terms of a gender thing first. I remember the first time of being exposed to gender privilege when I was a freshman at Marquette University. I went there as an undergrad, and I was in the honors program, and one of my female classmates came up to me and said, "Did you ever notice how the professor pays more attention to the men when they speak than to the women?" And I gave a very enlightened answer. I said, "Get out of here." And so, as enterprising honor students, we conducted an experiment. The next class, my classmate raised her hand and made some observation on the text. I think we're studying Hamlet, and someone boring like that. And so she made some, and then the professor politely acknowledged it. We watched the clock. 30 seconds went by. I raised my hand and simply paraphrased what she had said. And the professor said, "Mr. Massengale, that is a very astute and perceptive observation." And my friend turned to me and said, "Told you so." But we thought, well, wait a minute, she's a white woman, I'm an African-American man, I'm the only African-American in the honors program, maybe he's trying to be a good white liberal, make me feel welcome. So we got one of our white male friends in on it, and he hated the professor, so he's more than willing to cooperate. So The next class, again, my classmate raised her hand and made an observation. The professor politely acknowledged it. 30 seconds goes by. My friend Bob raises his hand, just simply paraphrases what she had said. The professor goes to the board, writes it down on the board, and says, in my 30 years of teaching, no one has ever made that connection. And again, she said, told you so. Now, this had been going on all semester. But I was blind to it. I simply took it as a given, as the way things are. I didn't think of it as male privilege. But that's exactly what it was. And it was the beginning of a journey of listening to voices that called me out of my comfort zone and made me realize that because of my gender and because of the way society is set up, it doesn't make me a bad person. But I have certain benefits that others don't have. That's what white privilege is. That the playing field is not level. But you and I have been carefully trained not to see it, and to get angry and defend it as, well, I'm hardworking. So is my friend. She was hardworking too. Telling stories like that can be the beginning of a conversion experience, but only the beginning, because one of the most insidious things about white privilege is that if we take it seriously, as you were very accurate in saying, if we take this seriously, it calls us to a journey of conversion as well. And it means that we have to raise some deeply troubling questions about what we've been taught as being normal. And nobody likes that. One of the ways in which I teach white privilege in the classroom, I use Monopoly. We play the game of Monopoly, because people wondering, walk into my office and they see these 6 Monopoly games there. And we get to the unit on white privilege, we simply play Monopoly, and I say, and the kids love this. It's like, oh yeah, we're gonna play board games. It's, yep, you're gonna do that. But before you play the game, you're gonna pull a racial identity card. And the racial identity card means you're gonna start with a baggie of a sandwich bag of assets. So the middle-class white family, they get the $1,500 in their little sandwich bag that Monopoly says you start with, and they also get, one of the red houses or one of the red properties or an orange property with a house on it. Then you've got a poor black family or a poor Latino family, they get a sandwich bag with only $200 in it. And they get Baltic or Mediterranean and no house. And then one of the 6 is the wealthy white family. And there's not enough money in the Monopoly board to give them the precise percentage. So they get a sandwich bag with $6,000 in it, boardwalk with a hotel, a summer house on Pacific Avenue, one of the green properties. They get a railroad, a utility, and a get-out-of-jail-free card. Now, I tell them, now what we're going to do is we're going to play the game. And since we're living in a land of formal equality where all that segregation stuff is history, we've changed all the laws, you're all going to be treated the same. So when you start on Go, you're going to get $200. Every time you pass Go, you get $200. We're treated exactly the same. Play the game. And then I walk around the room and watch what happens. And it comes as no surprise that the people with Baltic and Mediterranean, they're doing so well. So I walk around and say very helpful things like, oh, you're not really working really hard, are you? You're not really trying, are you? It's also interesting, a couple of times when I played the game, the rich white families at various groups start colluding with each other how to bankrupt the other people faster. It also happened once where the rich family didn't even know how to play the game, and the other students were helping him play, and I was like, we're helping him make money. And I was like in real life. And then the students start reflecting, and I say, look, just because we've changed the rules so now everyone is supposed to be legally the same doesn't mean we've made up for the long centuries in which we've institutionalized privilege. That's some of the ways in which it can work.
To address militarism. And what you said is true, that our national fortune is going for the military-industrial complex. And the only thing we count is, are we treating our veterans right, and et cetera, which are questions, but a more fundamental question, which is, I don't know anyone who's debating whether we should I never meet anybody who's debating whether we should cut back on the military. That is a bridge too far. How do you do it?
I simply raise the question and raise the issue. Because again, when we talk about the veterans become a smokescreen. Because if we looked at the slide, and I can't pull it up again, can you get back to the slide presentation? Let's see, they're getting it back, hopefully. It'll come. But you'll see that the veterans portion is separate from, okay, let's see. We're getting there. Close. There we go. Up, back. Okay. Veterans is right there. It's separate from the military. So when we talk about we need to support our military in order to support our veterans, it's like, wait a minute, that's a smokescreen because it's a separate line item. The two are not the same. But that's the kind of discourse that we have that keeps us from looking at what's really going on. The other thing is that, and I slipped over this slide, the military budget is so big we can't even vastly comprehend it. One of the most brilliant ways I saw was in Sojourners when they talked about Oreo cookies. And they said, because we can't understand $700 billion, let's talk about a stack of 70 Oreos. In comparison to that, the federal government spends just 4.5 Oreos on education, a half of an Oreo on alternative energy, and a fraction of an Oreo on Head Start. If you just take 7 Oreos off the Pentagon budget, 63 Oreos, you could provide health care for all the kids who don't currently have it. You could provide Head Start for all the kids who need it. You could eliminate our need for Middle East oil. You could change our country into one that cares about people, eliminates poverty, helps people climb out through education simply by reducing the budget by 10%. Part of what keeps our people, why we can't go very far, is that people don't have the information, but also part of what handicaps us as ministers of the gospel is, let's face it, most of us were not trained in seminary about how to preach on social justice. When I talk to priests around the country, priests tell me that their two weakest, i.e. worst courses, were their courses on homiletics, our people would say no surprise, and their course on social justice. So when you put the two together, preaching about social justice takes priests, most of us, well outside of our comfort zone. And I notice that seminary formation is going to be on your agenda. One of the things that most disturbs me about what we've done since 2000 is that we've replicated the very seminary system that got us into the mess in the first place. We've taken young men who enter with a great deal of sincerity. I'm saying this as someone who spent 14 years as a seminary professor. So we're at 4 of those as vice rector of the seminary, so I've got some cred here. We take people who come with very good intention and very sincere. We put them into a monastic environment, which is more monastic than many monasteries, having them pray an orarium that has no resemblance to the life they're going to be leading after ordination, separate them away from women as professors or classmates or any kind of meaningful presence, basically give them a formation system that's more focused on individual piety than any kind of real leading people to a living encounter with Jesus. And then we turn them loose and say, in 3 years, you're going to be a pastor. And moreover, because you're going to be a pastor within 3 years after ordination, we're much more concerned you learn how to read a parish budget than how to lead people to Jesus Christ. And then we wonder why we can't preach on these kinds of issues and why our people find this irrelevant. I'm simply saying that, it's one thing to say that we need skills, and we do need skills. We do. But it's another thing to say is that we are in a situation where our ecclesial environment militates us against doing what I'm asking us to do. Now, it's no excuse for us not to rise to the occasion, but it also means that, yes, you're right, because I'm hearing some frustration around the room, and your frustration is absolutely on point, but let's identify where the frustration is coming from and what the source of the frustration is. And that is, we have pro-Benedict saying, create joyful witnesses of passionate charity, and we're having a seminary formation system, which is basically saying, be pious, zip your hands above the waist, and if you get in trouble, you're screwed. I mean, seriously, that's what it's become. And then we wonder why the Catholic Church is bleeding members, or why many folks of color don't come to our churches.
An observation or a question and then an observation. I'm curious, did anyone enlighten or challenge the professor?
Did he what?
Did anyone enlighten or challenge the professor on his bias against women?
No. And I'll tell you why. And I'm often asked that question when I tell this story. One, I was 18, and that's not an excuse, but it's to say this. Many of us, when we see injustice happen, we don't know what to do with it. For example, if you see a Muslim student or a gay student being harassed because of their religion or their ethnicity, many of us think in the abstract, well, of course I do something, but would we really? Or we wouldn't know what to do. And also, to be honest with you, when that happened, I was simply in shock. I could not believe what I was hearing. And I was trying to absorb what was going on. Now, later, when I got into grad school and I saw something similar happen, by then I kind of knew what was going on, and so then I could be more, of an ally. But at the time, no one did.
The other observation I would have is that in terms of raising consciousness of people, we have to be willing to push the envelope. First of all, my name is Ken Fleck. I'm from the Archdiocese of Chicago, pastor of a white suburban parish at what at one time was the 4th largest in the Archdiocese. God's trying to tell me something. I've always been long-winded. That I've had Mike Flager out to speak at my parish and Larry Dowling as well, and I've been challenged on that for different reasons. And what I think would work is to, for example, we have a social action group in my parish, and we try to raise social consciousness through movies and discussion of that afterwards, inviting everybody to come over, whoever would like to. We had Hidden Figures recently, and we've been doing this for about 7 or 8 years now. It's called Movie Night with the Pastor. I won't go into the details. I think that if I can have permission and if we have this recorded, I would love to present this, your presentation, to our social action group. And this is one way to begin, without telling people what they should think, to, as we did here, raise the questions and raise their consciousness among themselves and be the yeast within our parishes.
What you're referring to is something I call the sower model. That for me, the parable of the sower and the seed is something that sustains me in my ministry. Because speaking personally, so often when you do this kind of work, you go home and you wonder, what was that about? What was that for? It didn't really lead anywhere, didn't go anywhere. And I finally had to make peace with the fact that I'm not responsible for the harvest. That my responsibility is to sow the seed. And some of it's going to fall on fertile soil. And when that happens, I rejoice. Yay! And a lot of it's going to fall on shallow ground, and some of it's going to fall on barren soil too. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to be faithful in the sowing and realizing that God will take care of the rest. And so we start doing what we can. We start doing what we can, realizing that it's never going to be enough. We start doing what we can. Yes.
Yeah, one of the things you said at the beginning is not being able to, in a sense, describe the ideal of a just society.
Right.
One of the things that's always struck me about Martin Luther King is the way that he wove together the gospel and U.S. culture, U.S. history, U.S. Fundamental constitutional documents. It was all part of his rhetoric, and so, he kind of pulled on the patriotic as well as the religious. And in conjunction with that, it seems to me a technique we might be able to use is to work more on struggling to articulate the vision, like he did with the Great World House, or to take what I find to be a wonderful phrase in those alternative Eucharistic prayers we have now, where right after the praying of the preface and the Sanctus, we pray to God who loves the human race. And if we just played with some of those phrases like that and worked on that with our people, and keep trying to sketch a vision that the church provides us, the gospel provides us, etc., that's what can take root better than the critique of our white supremacy feelings, etc., and hopefully, suggest that. And I read recently, it was a homily of Walter Burkhardt, and he did a wonderful thing of developing one of the parables and then applying it to his life today. And he said at the end, "But I find I'm not doing that. How about you?" And that was the end of his homily. Mm-hmm. So, as opposed to going at it head on, I just offer those as some thoughts of what can we do? How can we approach this?
Can I have a gentle yes, but, and I'm hearing something here and I want to articulate, I'm trying to be really sensitive about this, but I'm hearing you're talking about how do we bring, okay, to be blunt, I'm sorry. How do we bring white people along? And, well, that's the kind of the way that I'm hearing. And I have to say this. That's a useful discourse, but you're leaving out another whole group of folks who need to be heard from. Like people who look like me. And I'm saying that very deliberately because we're acting as if everyone or the people who count in the church are colored one way, whereas there are others who are also sisters and brothers, who also have a voice and an experience that needs to be heard and honored. What I'm hearing in one way is something like this. I remember I was giving a talk before the Conference of Major Superiors of Men, and one of them said in the Q&A, he asked the question, you know, we're a German province. We're proud of being a German province. We want to stay a German province. So what can we do to attract African Americans? And I said, you can't. But what I'm hearing is we have to be careful how we do this so we bring our people along and don't get them too upset. And the question becomes then, who are your people? Who's really Catholic? Because the history of the Catholic Church, when it comes to race, is that we don't engage these questions except in ways that do not make white people uncomfortable. That's the dominant history, and I could give you a whole course on that. But that's the dominant way in which the Catholic Church engages race. We will engage race up until the point that people get uncomfortable. But as people pointed out, there's really no way of making progress on this without making people uncomfortable. And one of the questions, I'm just going to raise this gently, but why is, I'm trying here. Why is your comfort always what's most important? Isn't that in itself a sign of white privilege? Why is your comfort always what dictates the pace of the discussion and the kind of discussion that takes place? I'm trying to be gentle with this, but I'm just hearing that, and I just want to throw that out there for you to think about.
So, but
There's a, where is, okay, over here,
Yeah.
yes. Okay. I'm being told that you're going to be the last question, and I'm an obedient Catholic priest sometimes, so this is what's going to happen. Okay.
okay, my plain question is, what can I do? What can I do next year? Because it was last 4th of June. What can I do next year with the Black and Indian Mission Collection to bring all this together for my people in the Bronx? Because I never received reports back of how that money is used, so I don't know really how to justify it. I know that there is great need also for this help or for this money, but also because there was a great friend of mine who is a priest, Irish descent in the Bronx, and he said once, and is it like we are going to go to Harlem and make a collection for the white destitute somewhere in the Bronx, something like that. And I was like, okay, yeah, maybe yes, but the thing is, what can I do with that collection next year to bring all this together and not just about the money and how the money is going, where or what?
Okay, thank you for that question. What you raised is a very important objection that often comes up, and that is, in terms of, are they going to have a collection in Harlem for the white parishes? In other words, when are we going to have White Pride Month? We have Black History Month, we're going to have White Pride Month. I hear that kind of stuff all the time. One of the things I think we can do with these kinds of collections is we can use them as what I do with the missionary. You talked about doing missionary appeals earlier. What I do with mission appeals is basically saying it's not so much about the money. Money's important. It's more about developing a mindset that the church we belong to is bigger than our parish. We talk about clericalism. Parochialism is a major sin in the Catholic Church. That part of the really difficulty we have in our parishes is that each parish sees themselves as entities unto themselves, and this thing called the archdiocese or diocese is simply this thing that siphons away our needed resources. But part of what I do with mission is to use that mission is to say, no, part of what's cool about being Catholic is that we have sisters and brothers who don't look like us. And to use the Black and Native American collection as an opportunity to remind people that, yes, we have brothers and sisters who don't look like us, who have a very different history like us, and that history is not an easy history to hear, but you know what? Despite that history, they're still part of us. They're still part of us. And maybe to retrieve the Pauline analogy of the body, when one part of the body suffers, the whole body suffers. And maybe to leave them with a question. What kind of church, what kind of country would we be if we really believed that? What kind of church, what kind of country would it be if we looked at Tamir Rice and we could see him as our child? Would we tolerate the kind of policing that we have in our country if I could see these children as mine and ours? How many of you have family, I'm not asking you to raise your hands, how many of you have family members that have been adolescents and have done some really stupid stuff and have not necessarily had to go through the court system? What would it be like if we could see these children as ours and see these people who are benefiting from this collection as ours? What I'm asking simply is, what would it be like if we were really Catholic? What would it be like if we were really Catholic? If we were really universal? I know I'm going to leave you on more questions than answers like Jesus did, so I'm going to sit down on my head and look forward to spending the next few days with you. Thank you.